Hey guys, this is Eric, and before this episode starts, I want to announce that we here at Punchboard Pagoda will be fundraising for Tap Cancer Out, a jiu-jitsu based charity raising money for cancer organizations as part of the 2025 Global Grappling Day. Our fundraising page for this event can be found in the show notes for this episode, as well as over on our website. If you can help us raise funds, that'd be awesome and greatly appreciated. Hey there, guys. This is Eric from Punchboard Pagoda. And a while back, a social media post by Jeff Glover, a formerly well-known grappler, made its way across my timeline. In it, he was whining about how black belts used to be meaningful and now they are worthless because people he thinks aren't quote-unquote real black belts are being promoted. Here's a full quote of the post. Black belt and BJJ used to have value. Now we are giving black belts to 50-year-old women who could get destroyed by a teenager with zero grappling skills. The days of the black belt are gone and not coming back. Let's just give everyone a black belt who trains long enough, right? What a joke it's become. Now, this is frankly a pretty stupid argument to believe in, but given Jeff Glover's long history of saying dumb things, along with being a somewhat racist bigot, I'm not really surprised by him saying this. You may also ask, but why do people bother to listen to him? Well, it has to do with the color of belt he's wearing around his waist, that he's also complaining about. In a future episode or article, I'll come back to this specific topic as the supposed devaluing of the black belt. However, Jeff's post does help segue into a specific discussion I want to make about the mythologizing of the black belt itself as well as those who hold it. As anyone can tell you, few symbols in martial arts carry as much reverence as a black belt does. It's a symbol showing that person's knowledge and skill in a martial art. In jiu-jitsu circles, it is the culmination of what often is a decade-long, consistent training and immersion into the grappling community by a single individual. But as jiu-jitsu has grown from a relatively niche martial art into a globally practiced sport, the way people see a black belt has, in ways, taken on a mythic quality that oozes off of the mats and enters into the social fabric that a gym is typically built around. Gyms then become a place where black belts are treated not just as experts in a sport, but as de facto leaders of a social group. Their status as a black belt grants them, by those who are mythologizing them, a place of authority on topics far beyond their scope and knowledge outside of grappling itself. They are crowned as an expert on topics that have mostly centered around politics, gender relations and studies, economics, ethics, and even philosophy itself. The means in which we understand and manage our society as a whole. This is a dangerous fallacy to fall into, and it ultimately leads to a harmful, toxic result within the sport itself, as well as the wider community. And this is, ultimately, thanks to a widespread epistemic error, the assumption that technical skill in one area of expertise makes you an expert in other areas. But let me be clear, the problem is not that there are black belts who have opinions on things. That's actually quite normal, and everyone is entitled to their own opinion. The problem is that their opinions are treated as inherently more valid simply because of that colored belt or rash guard that they may be wearing. This, in turn, creates a dangerous feedback loop where charisma and technical skill reinforce each other, and dissent is silenced. This has been long talked about by various people in sports in general, and about a decade ago, grappling phenom Ryan Hall penned this very well-crafted open letter about hero worship in jiu-jitsu that is worth rereading, and I will be including in the show notes. Today, I want to continue that discussion. To start, I think it's worth clarifying what exact fallacy is actually happening here. Like I said, the fallacy of authority is when someone is believed to be a credible expert or speaker on a topic simply because they hold some expertise in another, typically unrelated field. Here's a quick and easy example. A commercial comes on the TV and it claims that that particular brand of cereal is the best meal ever because Michael Jordan himself says that he has it every single day. In that scenario, Michael Jordan's status as an NBA legend is the authority that you're assuming means he can't be wrong about that cereal brand. In martial arts, this is quite rampant. A black belt in jiu-jitsu, in a very simplified way, is just an expert in using grappling on someone else. That's it. They are not, and it somewhat irritates me to feel the need to say this out loud, an expert on politics, sociology, or economics, unless they are legitimately experts on that topic thanks to education or work in those fields. But their experience and knowledge in that field is what makes them an expert. I'm going to listen to someone like Josh Hinger, who is not only a jiu-jitsu black belt, but also has a master's degree in economics, talk about jiu-jitsu and economics, since those are clearly his things. I would, of course, double check the things he is saying, and also would say I don't think he's necessarily someone to solely rely upon for information on, say, vaccine science. And yet, again, it irritates me to have to say this, there are people out there who treat black belts as if their opinions on these topics are inherently more valid than other people's. This even extends to fans, as you can see displayed in the MMA community. But we'll get to that example a little bit later. This conversation is not anything new. In fact, there has been enough research on this situation that there is even a fancy word for it. It's called epistemic trespassing. And it is quite dangerous, especially because the kind of person who ends up in this situation will oftentimes be unable to distinguish between legitimate expertise and misplaced confidence. It's that latter one that is the culprit. When a jiu-jitsu athlete who is of notoriety, or even simply someone with a black belt, speaks on politics or gender issues or whatever other topic they want to talk about, their audience may mistakenly assume that they have authority on the matter, when in reality, none exists at all. Some researchers on this field have argued that a degree of intellectual humility requires recognizing the limits of one's own expertise. Yet, in the culture of martial arts, the opposite is considered the ideal. There is a widespread belief that mastery of the body results in mastery of the mind. This conflation leads to a dangerous dynamic where someone's own charisma and technical skills are mistaken for being someone who is well-read and an expert on a topic. This mythologizing of the black belts has deep roots in the foundations of jiu-jitsu as a sport as well. We all know how the Gracie family took credit for quote-unquote creating jiu-jitsu after they rebranded judo techniques that they were taught. The way the Gracie family told it, they created the techniques themselves from scratch, and it was for a very long time sacrilegious in the wider jiu-jitsu community to talk about how actually the Gracie family got their ideas from judo. They also used their status within the sport to convince people that they were credibly skilled in other fields. Helio Gracie, on top of being a jiu-jitsu practitioner, was also involved in Brazilian politics back in the 1930s. And if you happen to know anything about politics in the 1930s in countries like the United States and Brazil at the time, then you wouldn't be surprised that he was tied to fascist political movements, which, given the stuff that the Gracies have allegedly gotten up to, isn't all that surprising. In the 1930s, Helio and his brothers were convicted for violently ambushing and attacking a catch wrestler, but received a pardon allegedly due to their political connections, a working relationship between right-wing thugs and law enforcement that proudly lives on today in modern society. This incident highlights the political entanglements that the heart of jiu-jitsu's origin story has. The Gracies, a family that really works hard at marketing themselves at all opportunities, made themselves seem as though they were the superior beings, physically, morally, and intellectually. Again, a thing that they still like to do even in the 2020s. We all mostly know the general story. The Gracie clan would go around to various gyms in Rio de Janeiro and challenge people to a fight, or sometimes just show up with a gang and demand a fight, also known as starting a brawl. When they were doing actual matches for money, or whatever the prize would be, their challenge matches and self-promotion created a narrative that Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is not just a martial art, but a superior philosophy for life. This narrative persists today, and holy God does it persist, with many black belts adopting the role of life coaches, spiritual guides, and political commentators. Again, we'll get to that last point a little bit later. The phrase, "keep politics out of jiu-jitsu," is often heard in gyms, but as the genuine great ambassador of the sport, Stephen Kesting, has repeatedly and accurately stated, jiu-jitsu has never been apolitical. The very founding of the sport started in Brazil and came from Matsuyo Maeda teaching the Gracie's judo as a result of numerous political acts and choices. The sport of jiu-jitsu is steeped in political violence, elitism, and ideological manipulation. To ignore this history is to simply live in alternate reality, one it seems people are rushing to relocate themselves in. The cult of personality is a powerful force in martial arts. It is not uncommon for charismatic black belts in the competition circuit to gain celebrity status due to their performances. This is basically how it works. The problem really is that along the way of becoming a notable name or person to listen to, people mistake the athletic skills of the person as justification to treat their words as gospel. This is especially pronounced in MMA and boxing, where fighters like convicted rapist Conor McGregor and the Adolf Hitler admirer Bryce Mitchell have built entire personas around their ability to speak authoritatively on any topic thanks to their status as an athlete. In jiu-jitsu, John Danaher is looked up to not just because of their technical knowledge, but for their philosophical musings as well. At one point in his life, Danaher studied philosophy at a graduate level and was doing that long before he was seen as an amazing coach in jiu-jitsu. Yet Danaher showing up on Holocaust denier Jake Shields' podcast, who has a history of promoting right-wing extremist views, causes me to question the limits of Danaher's intellectual thinking. We saw this when Joe Rogan spread numerous hoaxes, conspiracy theories, and outright lies on topics he literally has no expertise in, on top of consistently not really showing the depth of knowledge of jiu-jitsu as the UFC broadcast likes to make you think he has. We saw this when Bryce Mitchell talked about how Adolf Hitler was a quote-unquote good guy he wouldn't mind going fishing with, and that schools turn kids gay, which is why he'll be the sole arbiter of his children's homeschooling. The man also ripped apart his own scrotum thanks to using power tools, so take that as you will. We also saw this when Jake Shields repeatedly used homophobic and transphobic slurs and repeatedly promoted Holocaust denial talking points on his podcast. We saw this when Roberto Cyborg Abreu and Wagner Rocha and their respective gym networks allowed Marcel Goncalves, a fellow black belt and coach, to continue to associate with and be employed by them for 3 years, despite the fact Goncalves was arrested for sexually assaulting a minor. Abreu didn't even bother to speak to the victim for several years until the wider jiu-jitsu community was made aware of the assault, thanks in part to former ADCC organizer Mo Jassem. And that is just a quick list off the top of my head and keeps happening both with notable celebrities and even in more localized contexts in local communities. This blind obedience to black belts can have some serious consequences. It is what enables abuse. It leads to silencing any and all dissent or pushback against a black belt. It perpetuates harmful ideologies, and in recent years, the jiu-jitsu community has grappled with scandals involving all of these things, which all come from a culture of unquestioning respect. When students are taught to obey rather than to question, they become vulnerable to manipulation. This mythologizing of the black belt creates a power imbalance that can be exploited by people who are capable of abusing others. This is not a hypothetical situation or a theoretical concern. It is a very real and lived reality for many people, not just within jiu-jitsu, but within our overall society. This elevated position of moral authority can also distort public discourse. When athletes speak on complex issues without expertise, they can spread misinformation and reinforce harmful stereotypes, which we have seen in real time over and over again. The result is a community that values charisma over competence and obedience over critical thinking. Look, the black belt is a significant symbol. It represents years of hard work, discipline, and mastery of technique. But it is not a license to speak on every topic, nor is it a mark of moral or intellectual superiority. This idolizing of a black belt should be dismantled and replaced with a more nuanced understanding of expertise and authority. As the saying goes, true education is about the liberty to think critically and discuss openly, not domination of thought. In martial arts, this means creating spaces where students feel free to speak freely and challenge authority figures' views without repercussions. It means recognizing that a black belt is a beginning, not an end. The jiu-jitsu community really should be embracing a culture of critical thinking, something the likes of Joe Rogan and Bryce Mitchell all profess to believe in, but in practice stifle. This can be done by supporting the separation of technical skill from moral authority. A black belt should be respected for their grappling ability alone, not their opinions on unrelated topics. Sort of common sense stuff. At the end of the day, this is a larger issue that exists in our society, but is still avoidable with enough thought and care put in. And ultimately, that's what I personally would like to see more of. As a coach and a participant in the sport, I want to see more people criticizing the harmful rhetoric that figureheads in jiu-jitsu and beyond are putting out there thanks to their status as a black belt. We are starting to see more of that, which is a good sign that the community is starting to get better at self-policing. So let's just keep doing that and keep this all in mind as we go forward. So that's it for this episode. You can find more of my online ramblings over on Blue Sky with my handle @GrapplersWin, which is also the same URL where you can find more of my written work on top of what I've been writing here at Fight Island.